The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, episode 17, Faith in the Unknown Spirituality Without Control. You're listening to The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, where raw honesty meets the messy truth of being alive. I'm James Miller, and in this episode, we're walking into a territory many of us have both longed for and feared, the place where certainty dissolves, and all we have left is trust. Faith is a complicated word. For some, it's a lifeline. For others, it's the source of their deepest wounds. And after trauma or disillusionment, faith can feel like something you either lose entirely or cling to in ways that are more about control than connection. But what if there's another way? A way to hold faith without forcing it to fit a system. A way to trust without demanding guarantees. A way to meet the unknown without turning it into an enemy. In this episode, we'll explore what happens when our old spiritual frameworks collapse, how control and fear often disguise themselves as faith, the psychological and somatic realities of surrender, and how to reimagine spirituality as a living, personal, and evolving relationship, free from dogma. This is for the part of you that's tired of chasing certainty, but still wants to feel guided. The part of you that's been hurt by systems, but still believes in something bigger. The part that's ready to breathe into the unknown and find safety there. Let's begin. When certainty breaks, losing the old map theme, disillusionment as a spiritual threshold. When a belief system collapses, it doesn't just change your mind. It shakes your body, your relationships, your identity. In this part, we explore the grief, confusion, and hidden potential that come with losing the spiritual map you once trusted. Attributes: disillusionment, identity loss, existential anxiety, spiritual grief, cognitive reframing. We'll unpack how losing certainty can feel like freefall, and how that freefall, if we stay present to it, can become the ground of a more authentic spirituality. Searching the way. When a belief system works for you, it's like having a well-marked map. You know where you're going. You know the rules of the road. But when that system stops making sense, through lived experience, heartbreak, or new understanding, the map starts to blur. At first, it feels like liberation. But then the questions creep in. If the map was wrong, what else was? How do I trust myself now? What happens to all the relationships built on that shared certainty? This is the moment many people rush to replace the old map with a new one, anyone, just to feel anchored again. But what if we paused instead? What if losing the old map wasn't the end of our journey, but the beginning of a more honest one? Personal reflection. When my spiritual framework was brought into question, it no longer felt like an awakening. It felt like exile. The rituals, language, and community that once gave me belonging now felt foreign. Even my body reacted. A knot in my stomach during prayers I'd said my whole life. A tightness in my chest when someone spoke with absolute certainty about the divine. Looking back, I can see that my nervous system was in a constant state of hypervigilance. I was scanning for danger, because if my spiritual truths could unravel, what else could? This tied directly into what I now understand through polyvagal theory. My sense of safety wasn't just intellectual, it was deeply physiological. Losing the map put my body into a state of survival. It took a long time to see that this wasn't a sign I had failed spiritually. It was a sign I was in transition. That uncertainty wasn't a void to be feared, but a space being cleared for something real. Psychological insight. Spiritual disillusionment and cognitive reframing psychologists studying meaning-making note that losing a belief system can trigger symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress, intrusive thoughts, hyperarousal, and social withdrawal. Spiritual disillusionment often prompts us to undergo cognitive reframing, where we reevaluate the events, beliefs, and assumptions that once anchored our worldview. This process can be deeply destabilizing, but it's also the foundation of a more resilient and self-directed spirituality. By sitting in the mapless space, we begin to distinguish between beliefs we were taught to need and truths we live by. Insight prompt: when have you lost a map, spiritual or otherwise, in your life? What emotions came up in that space between losing it and finding your footing again? Theory in action prompt this week: notice when you reach for certainty out of discomfort. Pause before grabbing a new map. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I don't know? Write the answer down, not to fix it, but to see it. and control disguised as faith, when surrender is conditional theme. The subtle grip of fear in spirituality, sometimes what we call faith, is control wearing holy clothes. It's the attempt to manage life through rituals, rules, or certainty, rather than truly trusting the unknown. In this part, we'll explore how fear can hide inside spiritual practice, and how to tell the difference between guidance and grasping. Attributes: conditional trust, fear-based belief, spiritual bypassing, control strategies, uncertainty avoidance. We'll look at the psychology of why we cling to certainty and how conditional surrender keeps us from genuine spiritual freedom. Surrendering self-true surrender is terrifying because it means giving up the illusion that we can make life safe by being good enough or devoted enough. After my old belief system fell apart, I thought I'd freed myself from control, but really I'd just swapped one set of rules for another. Instead of a doctrine, I used spiritual routines, daily meditations, affirmations, manifestation rituals, not purely out of joy or alignment, but out of the belief that if I kept them up, I could avoid suffering. It was my nervous system's way of bargaining with the unknown. This wasn't faith, this was anxiety dressed as devotion. And yet, it's such a common stage in spiritual rebuilding, clinging to something that looks like trust, but means I'll surrender, but only if I get the outcome I want. Personal reflection. When I think back, there were moments I genuinely felt connected to something bigger, but those moments were often followed by a quiet, almost invisible checklist in my mind. Was I aligned enough? Did I do the right things? Will this protect me from loss? The truth is, my spiritual practices were soothing, but they were also transactional. They mirrored the same conditional love I'd experienced in childhood, where safety was earned, not given. It wasn't until I began studying attachment theory and trauma-informed spirituality that I realized what was happening. My faith was operating from an anxious avoidant attachment pattern. I wanted intimacy with the divine, but I also wanted guarantees that intimacy would keep me from being hurt. The day I admitted this to myself was the day something shifted. I stopped using faith as a shield and began letting it be a relationship, one where not knowing was part of the point, and it has given me strength in my trust in God, which keeps being rewarded. I'm proud of letting things be, and sometimes the not knowing is equally beneficial to knowing. Psychological insight. The illusion of control in spiritual practice research in locus of control theory shows that people with an external locus often attribute outcomes to fate, luck, or a higher power, while those with an internal locus attribute outcomes to their actions. After trauma, we can swing between extremes, either believing everything is up to us or nothing is. When fear dominates, we often use spiritual tools to manipulate life outcomes rather than to build presence. This illusion of control offers short-term comfort but limits our capacity for genuine trust. True surrender requires tolerating the vulnerability of not knowing and finding safety in the process itself, not the guarantee of a result. Insight prompt. Where in your life might your faith actually be a form of control? What rituals, prayers, or habits feel more like bargaining than genuine trust? Theory and action prompt this week. Choose one spiritual or self-soothing practice you normally use to manage uncertainty. Do it, but release the outcome. Notice any anxiety that comes up when you let go of the expectation that it will work in a specific way. The physiology of surrender safety in letting go theme. Trust as a body experience. Real trust doesn't live in the mind. It's anchored in the body. We can tell ourselves to let go 1,000 times, but if our nervous system still perceives danger, surrender will feel like free fall. This part explores how safety is built somatically and why surrender often starts with physiology before philosophy. Attributes: nervous system regulation, interoception, somatic grounding, embodied trust, felt safety. We'll look at how trauma shapes the body's relationship to the unknown and why surrender requires more than belief. It requires bodily permission. Nervous system rejection to letting go. I used to think surrender was purely a mental choice, something you just decided to do. People would say, just let go, as though I could press a mental switch and suddenly feel safe in uncertainty. But the truth was, every time I tried to let go, my body tightened. My shoulders curled forward, my stomach knotted, my breath got shallow. I was telling myself I trusted the process, but my nervous system was screaming, "No, we don't." It wasn't that I lacked willpower. It was that my body had learned, through repeated experiences, that the unknown was dangerous. My history wasn't just in my memory, it was in my muscle tone, my breathing patterns, the micro contractions I carried every day. And here's what I learned: trust can't just be taught, it has to be felt. Personal reflection: I remember one evening sitting in meditation, trying to release a fear about my future. My mind repeated mantras about trust, but my body stayed braced. Then something happened. I shifted my attention to my breath, not as a tool to force relaxation, but as something to be with. I noticed how much I was holding my stomach in. I let it soften, my chest opened slightly. I breathed deeper without trying to. And in that small moment, I realized surrender wasn't about pushing myself into openness. It was about giving my body enough cues of safety that openness could happen naturally. Learning about polyvagal theory helped make sense of this. It explained why no amount of positive thinking could override the physiological state of defense. My body needed real-time evidence that I was safe before my mind could genuinely trust. Since then, my spiritual practice has included more body-based rituals, walking slowly, placing a hand on my heart, humming to feel the vibration in my chest, not to make something happen, but to let my body know, you are safe enough to let go here. Psychological insight. The somatic foundation of trust. Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory describes how our nervous system continually scans for cues of safety or danger. When in a defensive state, fight, flight, or freeze, our capacity for connection and trust is compromised. For surrender to be possible, we must access the ventral vagal state, the branch of the parasympathetic system that supports social engagement, presence, and openness. This often comes not from thinking differently, but from feeling differently in the body. Practices that stimulate the vagus nerve, deep breathing, gentle humming, grounding touch, a slow movement, can help create a bodily state where surrender feels not like falling, but like being held. Insight prompt. When you've tried to let go in the past, what happened in your body? What cues could you give yourself to feel safer in moments of uncertainty? Theory and action prompt this week. Practice one body-first surrender ritual. Examples: place both hands on your heart and breathe deeply for 3 minutes. Walk at half your normal pace and notice the sensation in your feet. Hum softly for a few minutes, feeling the vibration in your chest. Afterwards, reflect. Did this make letting go feel more accessible? Meaning without the map. Rebuilding a framework after disillusionment theme, creating flexible belief systems. When the old map of meaning no longer fits, it can feel like we're floating untethered. In this part, we explore how to rebuild a worldview after spiritual collapse, one that is rooted in curiosity rather than control. Attributes: narrative reconstruction, existential flexibility, cognitive openness, resilience, adaptive beliefs. We'll look at how to live without rigid certainty while still having a deep sense of purpose, and why the frameworks we create after disillusionment often serve us better than the ones we inherited. Orienting new ground. Losing my old spiritual framework felt like standing on a cliff edge with no ground beneath me. There had once been answers for everything, an explanation for why I was here, what it meant to be good, and where I was going when I died. It was comforting, even when it was rigid. But when those answers started to crumble, I felt exposed. Without that structure, I thought I might disappear altogether. I was terrified that if I didn't replace it with something equally certain, I'd never feel safe again. What I didn't realize was that this in-between space, where nothing was fully known, was where my truest form of meaning would grow. It wasn't about finding the right replacement map. It was about learning to navigate with a compass instead. A compass doesn't tell you every landmark. It doesn't eliminate mystery. It simply helps you orient even when you can't see the whole path. Personal reflection. For years, my beliefs had been a kind of scaffolding. They told me how to behave, what to strive for, and where to place my hope. But they also limited what I could question. When that scaffolding came down, I felt both free and lost. I tried to reconstruct it quickly, grabbing at new philosophies, spiritual teachers, and rituals, hoping one would fit as perfectly as the old. But eventually, I stopped rushing. I began to piece together meaning from lived experience, not just doctrine. I realized I could carry multiple perspectives at once without demanding they merge into one perfect answer. It took many years, many lessons and experiences, but what it has led to is me, happy just being present. A clear mind, enjoying typing up this episode. Narrative therapy taught me that my map didn't need to be a fixed object. It could be a living document, one I revised as I grew. That flexibility has become my safety. Not because I know everything, but because I trust myself to keep learning. Psychological insight. Narrative flexibility and resilience research on meaning making after loss or disillusionment shows that people who can revise their narratives, rather than clinging to outdated frameworks, tend to have better psychological outcomes. Narrative therapy encourages identifying the stories we've inherited and consciously choosing which to keep, rewrite, or discard. This fosters what psychologists call existential flexibility, the ability to adapt our worldview without collapsing into nihilism or fear. By building a framework that can evolve, we create a container for meaning that doesn't shatter every time life surprises us. Insight prompt. Which parts of your old spiritual or philosophical map still serve you? Which parts no longer fit and why? Theory and action prompt. Draw your current map of meaning not as a rigid set of rules, but as a living network. Include the values that guide you now, the questions you're still exploring, the practices that anchor you. Review it in 6 months. Notice what's shifted. This is your compass in action. Trusting life on life's terms, living without the guarantee theme. Surrendering to uncertainty control gives the illusion of safety, but real safety often comes from adaptability. In this part, we explore what it means to trust life without demanding certainty, and how letting go can create more resilience, not less. Surrender, uncertainty tolerance, emotional flexibility, resilience, self-trust. We'll examine how releasing the need for guarantees opens the door to a richer relationship with life's unpredictability, and why surrender is an active skill rather than a passive resignation. Narrative framing. We are wired to crave certainty. The mind wants a plan, a clear if this then that logic to hold on to. This isn't weakness, it's a survival instinct. But life is rarely that predictable, and the more we try to wrestle it into submission, the more it slips through our fingers. When I first let go of control in my own life, it wasn't graceful. It felt like I was tumbling. Myself and others mistook surrender for giving up, like I was abandoning my responsibility to shape my future. But over time, I realized surrender wasn't about inaction. It was about releasing the illusion that I could control every variable. True trust in life is like learning to swim in open water. You don't freeze when the waves come. You don't demand the sea be flat before you get in. You learn to float, to move with the current, to rest when needed, and to accept that you won't see the whole coastline from where you are. Personal reflection. There was a period in my life when I needed every outcome planned, every risk calculated. I believed if I prepared enough, I could outmaneuver pain. But that way of living was exhausting, and it didn't work. Life still handed me curveballs I never saw coming. The turning point came during a time of deep personal uncertainty. I had lost a job I thought was secure, a relationship I thought would last, and a sense of who I was. I couldn't fix it overnight. I couldn't predict what was next. All I could do was keep showing up for the day in front of me. The surprising thing was that when I stopped forcing the future to match my vision, better things emerged, things I would never have planned. That's when I began to see surrender not as passivity, but as partnership with the unknown, psychological insight. Radical acceptance and uncertainty-tolerant psychologist Marsha Linehan's work on radical acceptance teaches that suffering comes not from pain itself, but from our resistance to reality. When we demand certainty in an uncertain world, we create unnecessary suffering. Uncertainty tolerance, the ability to function without needing a fixed answer, is linked to better mental health, lower anxiety, and greater adaptability. It's not about liking unpredictability, but learning that we can survive and even thrive within it. Insight prompt. When has letting go of control unexpectedly led to something better? What would it look like to trust life today, even in one small way? Theory and action prompt. This week, identify one area where you've been clinging to certainty. Ask, What am I afraid will happen if I stop trying to control this? Release one micro control habit, e.g., overplanning, overchecking, overthinking. Observe what unfolds when you create space for the unknown. Faith as a daily practice. Building trust in small moments theme. Everyday acts of spiritual trust faith doesn't have to be grand or dramatic. Sometimes it's built in the smallest, quietest choices. In this part, we explore how to make trust a lived practice, not just an abstract belief. Attributes, presence, ritual, micro-surrender, patience, self-connection. We'll see how consistent intentional acts, even tiny ones, create an inner stability that grows over time, making it easier to live without needing all the answers. Narrative framing. For years, I thought faith was something you either had or didn't, like an on-off switch. But the truth is, it's more like a muscle. It strengthens when you use it, weakens when you neglect it, and adapts when you train it in different ways. Faith in the unknown is cultivated in daily moments. It's a choice to take a step without seeing the whole staircase. It's in sending a message without knowing the reply. It's in resting when your mind screams that you should be doing more. We think of trust as something we grant to others, but the deeper work is learning to trust ourselves to handle whatever comes. That's the root of spiritual resilience, the knowing that no matter what unfolds, you won't abandon yourself. Personal reflection. One of the most transformative seasons of my life began not with a lightning bolt of spiritual revelation, but with a single, mundane ritual, getting up and going out for early morning walks. It sounds small, but it was my first act of choosing presence over control. It was a way of saying, I will start the day with myself, not with the chaos of the world. That little choice became a thread that wove through other parts of my life, choosing to walk without headphones sometimes, to pause before reacting in conversations, to let a decision breathe overnight before forcing it. These small acts didn't make my life instantly certain or easy, but they taught me to meet the unknown with more steadiness. They reminded me that faith isn't about removing uncertainty. It's about creating enough inner safety to walk through it. Psychological insight, behavioral consistency, and neural pathways neuroscience shows that repeated behaviors shape the brain's wiring through neuroplasticity. By consistently practicing micro surrenders, like letting go of a rigid plan or tolerating a moment of silence, we train the nervous system to stay regulated in the face of uncertainty. Over time, these small acts compound, building a baseline of trust that's harder to shake when larger disruptions come. Insight prompt. What's one small daily ritual that helps you feel connected to yourself? Where could you add a moment of micro surrender into your day? Theory in action prompt this week. Choose one repeatable act of trust, something small enough that you can sustain it. Examples. Journaling for 5 minutes without editing, taking a short walk without a set destination, allowing a conversation to unfold without rushing to fill the silence. Notice how your body feels during and after. Walking into the fog living faith in unscripted moments theme. Embodied trust in real life faith without control isn't an abstract concept. It's something that either shows up in our behavior or it doesn't. The real test isn't when you're meditating or journaling about surrender. It's when you're in the thick of the unknown, when the stakes feel high, and when you don't have the safety net of certainty. This part explores how to apply trust in unpredictable, emotionally loaded moments without abandoning self-protection or discernment. Attributes: embodied presence, decision-making in uncertainty, emotional regulation, adaptive resilience here. We examine how trust is cultivated through practice, not theory. We'll explore how the body signals readiness for risk, how to recognize when surrender is wise versus when boundaries are needed, and how to carry faith into everyday choices, not as blind hope, but as grounded engagement with life, connecting to self. It's one thing to talk about surrender when you're safe on the couch. It's another when you're standing in the fog, making a decision that could change everything. That's when old patterns of control grip the hardest, when uncertainty feels like danger, and every fiber of your body wants to pull back into the familiar. Living faith in the real world isn't about ignoring risk. It's about staying connected to yourself while stepping into the unknown. It's noticing your breath when your chest tightens, remembering your values when fear scrambles your thinking, and making space for curiosity alongside caution. Sometimes faith means saying yes to a leap. Other times, it's staying still long enough for the path to become clearer. Both are valid, both are brave. Personal reflection: I've had moments where I thought I was ready to trust until the situation arrived. Suddenly, my spiritual calm was nowhere to be found. My hands were shaking. My mind was running through disaster scenarios. My instinct was to retreat, to protect myself from the possibility of loss. But the times I chose to stay, to breathe, to notice, to listen before acting, those became turning points. I didn't always get the outcome I wanted, but I learned something more important. My nervous system could survive uncertainty without collapsing. My self-trust grew stronger than my fear. Faith, for me, isn't about everything going well. It's about believing I can meet whatever comes and still recognize myself on the other side. Psychological insight, stress tolerance, and embodied decision-making neuroscience shows that under stress, the prefrontal cortex, are responsible for rational thinking, can go offline while the amygdala floods the body with fear signals. This is why decision-making in uncertainty often defaults to survival patterns rather than values-driven choices. Trauma-informed practices can retrain the body to regulate under pressure. Somatic techniques like grounding, slow exhalations, or orienting to your surroundings can bring the prefrontal cortex back online, allowing you to make decisions from presence rather than panic. This embodies trust in action. Insight prompt: when faced with uncertainty, do you tend to leap too quickly or hold back too long? What does your body do when you stand at a decision point in the fog? Theory in action prompt: identify a small area of your life where you've been avoiding action because the outcome feels uncertain. This week, take one step toward engaging with it. Before you act, pause, breathe. Feel your feet on the ground. Remind yourself, I can meet this moment without knowing everything. Let the experience show you what your nervous system is capable of when partnered with presence. Faith without the map, faith without control, doesn't mean abandoning discernment or floating through life untethered. It's the practice of showing up fully in each moment, even when the outcome is hidden from view. It's about trusting your ability to navigate life's terrain without needing every turn marked on the map. As you walk into the places where certainty dissolves, remember, surrender is not submission. It's a conscious choice to stop gripping the illusion of control so tightly that you miss the life happening in front of you. It's the quiet courage of meeting each moment as it is, not as you wish it would be. In the days ahead, pay attention to the small acts of trust you extend to yourself, to others, to the unfolding of your path. These are not minor moments. They're the scaffolding of a life built on something deeper than fear. You're not aimless, you're aligned. In our next episode, we'll shift from trust in the unknown to the radical act of resting enough. We'll explore what it means to step out of the world's endless push for more and into the grounded peace of contentment. That's episode 18, The Art of Enough Rest, Contentment and Peace in a Hyperworld. This has been the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. If this episode stirred something in you, a question, a discomfort, or even a sense of relief, sit with it. Let it speak. That's where your growth begins. Until next time, stay grounded, stay honest, and keep walking toward the truth that's yours to live. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of The Inversiverse, a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 the simulated self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 the spell of the mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 conscious seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 the myth of sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 the algorithmic mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 the noise of knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 belief machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 submerged signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 the alchemy within traces, food, frequency, and the forgotten intelligence of the body. Episode 20 encoded flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.